What an honour to be here. I would like to call all the panel up to join me on stage and we can all take a seat. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Janani Vivekananda. I'm the Head of Programme for Climate Diplomacy and Security at Adelphi. And it's been a real honour and a pleasure to work with our German and Kenyan colleagues to bring this first Berlin Climate Security Conference, Nairobi, into fruition. The aim of the BCSC Nairobi is to identify joint priorities for action to address these climate-related risks to peace and security that we've heard about across Africa. Key to understanding this is the perspectives from civil society that can reflect the realities of those most affected, most vulnerable to these risks, including youth, marginalised groups, women, girls, boys and men. And this session is intended to set the stage, to open the conference with these perspectives that are crucial to the debate, but that are oftentimes overlooked. So we aim to take stock of progress with this session, starting with these perspectives. Whilst we know that action needs to be catalysed at the highest level of political leadership, we want to start the conversation with a focus on youth, with a focus on women, and with a focus on civil society. So we have an excellent panel. I'm just waiting for one more of our speakers. He's on his way, and the microphones, and then we'll get started. But whilst I'm waiting, I will introduce the two that we have. We have Khalid Ben Mansour, who is the African Youth Ambassador for Peace of the African Union Commission. And delighted to have you here. And we have Alice Reza, Senior Director for Policy Influence and Engagement at the WWF. Very warm welcome.
Families being displaced and disrupting the lives of young people who depend, for example, on the ocean for sustenance or economic opportunities. So some of the people, they actually make a living out of the sea. Young people bear the brunt of the social economic risks associated with climate change. So the limited access to education or healthcare due to the environmental degradation and the challenging climate patterns, they make it even harder for them to access opportunities. So as a result, their prospects of a stable or prosperous future are compromised. This creates a sense of despair in the face of the existing challenges. I'll give you an example from my region, North Africa, which includes countries like my country, Tunisia. We witness specific regional challenges that affect young people. We have seen in the first quarter of 2023 the very pressuring challenge of water scarcity, and we were threatened by droughts. I think by natural miracle we were saved by the heavy rains earlier this year. But it creates in young people a sort of frustration. Everyone was concerned about the future and how we would actually behave or how we will take action in the face of these challenges. So the region is already confronted with the impacts of desertification, water scarcity, and agriculture disruptions. These are all exacerbated by climate change. So we are in the face of diminished opportunities in the sectors like fisheries, agriculture, and tourism, three of the most powerful fields in which economic opportunities come from. Also, as the region of North Africa represents a gateway between two continents, it also faces added pressure of migration flows. So resulting from environmental factors, which creates an additional burden already on its youth population. We have seen a new phenomena recently that is called climate-induced migration. So we have seen more young people migrating due to the impacts of climate change, and not only young people, even children with their families migrating. Another and last point that I found really interesting, and sometimes we forget to highlight it, which is the psychological and emotional toll of climate change. The climate-related risks or the uncertainties and disruptions caused by climate change and environmental instability can lead to heightened anxiety, stress, and a sense of despair to young people. Some people, when they see that their future is unstable or impacted by the climate risks, it creates a sort of anxiety threatening their future. How can I do in the face of these challenges? How my future is being impacted by this? Am I going to survive when a conflict induced by climate change, or if I'm going to have to migrate, what's going to happen next? So the mental well-being is linked directly to the state of environment in their community. I'm going to finish with one statistics, which has been a recent study actually conducted in Kenya that proved that 73% of the young people in the country reported experiencing negative effects of climate change in their lives. And the study highlighted increased vulnerability to food insecurity, water scarcity, and economic instability, underscoring the urgent need for targeted economic interventions to address the climate-related challenges faced by youth. So I think we already face a lot of challenges in the midst of climate change, and I think we will go through later how we can intervene to empower young people.
Thank you so much, Khalid. I think that's a really important point to flag. Youth are often characterized as a problem. As you know, we hear about the idle youth, the young men who are getting involved in crime and gangs, or we hear them characterized as victims. And yet there is a lot more to this. I think it's really important that you really flag this frustration, this sense of uncertainty about their futures, but also this the psychosocial part, which is often overlooked, I think is really important to appreciate. But youth aren't simply problems and victims. There's also a lot more agency. So what role do you think young people can play and should be empowered to play to be kind of active agents of change to address some of the risks that they face?
It's very unfortunate to place young people either as the perpetrators of violence or as victims vulnerable to whatever phenomena that we come across in the world, especially that young people are perceived as victims in the discourse surrounding climate change and security. So such perceptions, I believe, they fail to capture the tremendous potential young people have as a group or as agency, and what potential they possess. So in reality, young people are not just passive recipients of the impacts. They are active agents of change. They are catalysts for innovation. They are advocates for sustainable development. And we have seen concrete examples of the tremendous efforts and the creativity that young people have shown as a constituency in the last decade. So rather than viewing young people solely as a burden, we must recognize their capacity to drive positive change. I think one of the important elements to incorporate in this discussion is involving them in decision-making processes. I think now it's about time that we incorporate the vision or the perspectives of young people in policy-making processes. They are the ones confronted directly with the issue. They are the ones coming from the vulnerable communities impacted by climate change. So they are the most adequate group to address what are the gaps that should be filled and how we can shift policies to better address their needs and concerns. We need to also provide them with capacity building, especially the education, which can be a stimulator for the creation of green jobs and also for the economic resilience in the face of climate change. Also, we can support partnerships and network. We have seen the Climate for Peace, which is one of the initiatives that was created to support financing for climate and to sustain peace and security, and encourage platforms like peer-to-peer learning and advocacy. I think when a large group of people meet in the same room and contribute to the same goal, it gives them more of a stronger position to face or confront challenges like climate change. So overall, I think it's time. It's really time to move beyond the limited narratives of youth as the problem. I think if we were the problem, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today. So I think I'm a very tiny example and a very modest example from the astonishing profiles and innovators that exist in Africa. So young people are really dynamic agents of change. They possess the passion, the determination, the commitment, and the determination needed to address climate change and security risks. I think we just need to give them the spaces and the right opportunities where they can actually contribute effectively.
Thank you so much, Khalid, and an inspiring example as well to all of us. Thank you very much. Really important points. Alice, I'd like to come to you. Your work at WWF puts you in direct contact with the communities, some of the most marginalised communities facing the risks of climate change to their human security. We often in Africa hear something of a reductionist narrative when it comes to climate security, which is often kind of characterized as this farmer-herder conflict or pastoralists fighting over grazing land. But this is part of the narrative. This is one of the pathways, but it's not the only pathway. I'd like to ask you to share maybe some other experiences or examples, of how climate security risks affect other marginalized groups, perhaps some that we haven't heard of so much.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I thought a lot about this, and what could I say that is different? I imagine a lot of people in the room here who've done a lot of studies on climate and security. But I realized that there's always one thing missing from this discussion, and that is nature. And because I work for the World Wide Fund for Nature, it makes sense that we talk about nature. Because when you think about it, all of these conflicts are really about nature. It's about water, it's about land, and it all starts with nature. So the first point I want to put forward is we need to make sure nature is firmly in this discussion. In fact, we should maybe rename this as the Berlin Climate, Nature and Security Conference, because after all, most of the issues around climate are very much, some of the issues are induced by nature. So I think that make a strong point about nature. And let me also talk about the fact that I sit on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council for Nature and Security, and we are starting to have this discussion about how we need to bring nature firmly into this discussion. That's one. The second one is an economics case, and I'm an economist, so I want to point it out. I looked at the IMF study today showing that conflict and insecurity cause an economic contraction of up to 20% in the Sahel. And across sub-Saharan Africa, annual growth in countries that are facing conflict is 2.5% points lower than countries that are peaceful. So the economic argument also needs to be made, because in any time we're in this problem, we delay and impede crucial investments in this. And then the last one is maybe more localized. And I think it's about, we talk about the impacts of climate, and you talked about the pastoral issues. But actually, a lot of them are localized. And we know that there are so many other issues happening in those communities that when climate comes in and causes, a whole protracted conflict, whether it's Darfur, whether it's Mali, whether it's Karamoja, these are areas that have always had conflict. And when you add climate change, it becomes even more. But the most important thing is also to note that different people are affected differently. We cannot just say one size fits all. And I think when we develop climate adaptation policies, we need to take into consideration that there will be different people affected differently, and the local context really matters. And most of the time, also women, of course, and children face disproportionate impacts. So 3 points to me: the economic case, the nature case, but also the case that different people are affected differently, and that we must keep that in mind.
Thank you so much. And since there is this diversity of impacts, there's also a diversity of solutions across different sectors. Many of our solutions lie outside of the traditional development or climate change adaptation space. For example, in agriculture or mining or in oil and gas or the renewable energy sector. We've heard a lot about the potential there from our keynote welcome this morning. What would you like to see in an outcome of this conference to encourage African governments and maybe businesses and international donors to adopt sustainable and peace-positive pathways across these other sectors?
Yeah, I think so first and foremost, I think we need to talk about the green transition. We hear about this a lot. I mean, when you think about the fact that we are pushing very hard to our climate solutions are all about reducing emissions, right? And we want to see growth in wind and solar and green technologies. But what does that mean? That means the increased demand in renewable earth minerals, right? And where are those located? Those are located in countries where you still have some governance issues. So I think it's extremely important for us to understand that interplay. And when we have a rapid decline in fossil fuels, how does that affect, when we push for a rapid decline in fossil fuels, what does that mean for countries that are oil exporters, Angola, Nigeria? Is there an alternative that we put in place? So for me, the transition is important. That South Africa, we are seeing making a lot of progress on how they are looking at the green transition from coal. We're seeing that happening. So I think it's important that we talk about the need to move into clean energy, the need to move to reduce emissions, but also the need to take into consideration the uncompensated distribution effects that might come from and increase conflict, might come and also increase conflict. I think the other ones, and I think we great to recognize, I mean, the work that has already been done there. I think the AU, African Union Peace and Security Council, really continuing to focus on this issue. We know that Africa sponsored the UN Security Council resolution. Those are all issues that we excited. The IPCC fifth assessment, really looking at the chapter on human security. So we're seeing a lot more, and we need to call for more and more scholarship from this region to really inform those discussions. And then really, it's governance, isn't it? It's the rights, it's the grazing rights, it's the land rights, it's the land tenure. Those are always going to be important issue. And finally, it is the way we coordinate. The issues they are governance issues, they are conservation issues, they are development issues. And so the humanitarian agenda, the development agenda, the conservation agenda where I work, we all need to be working much more together. So I'll be pushing for that. Governance, coordination, green transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. I think between the two of you, there's a lot there. I've heard the need for understanding the importance of education and investing in the economic resilience of young people, about the importance of including nature and biodiversity in our conversations about climate action, about ensuring that we do need a green transition, but it needs to be conflict sensitive. We need to understand not just what these pathways look like between climate change, peace and security, but how they affect different people in different ways, and also the importance of governance. So I'd like to turn to you, Ambassador Ali Mohammed. You're the presidential envoy and the climate envoy for presidential advisor, and the climate envoy for Kenya. And this is a real honor and a privilege that you can join us here today and listen to these perspectives. What will you do in your role, particularly as climate envoy? You'll be going to COP28. What will you take with you from this to ensure that the realities of those affected, or those whose human security is most affected by these climate change impacts, will have their issues reflected in the political and the financial commitments that are forged at the Africa Climate Summit and also at COP28?
Well, good morning and thank you very much. First of all, let me commend and appreciate the government of Germany for bringing this conference to Africa, where the issues and the impacts of climate change is more real. 80% of the most vulnerable 50 or so countries are found in this continent. This continent suffers the most when it comes to climate change impacts. In the Horn of Africa, where we are here, we're just getting out of one of the worst drought situation in decades, where we've lost, as somebody said earlier, 9.5 million or thereabout livestock. And this is livelihood of people being destroyed. What that leads to is massive displacement. What that leads to is massive conflicts. And we have communities conflicting and fighting over the dwindling resources, whether it is water, whether it is the pasture land and so forth. So that is what is happening in the eastern part of Africa. In the central part of Africa, we'll all have seen the impacts of the excess amount of water and the flash floods that have washed away hundreds upon hundreds of homes and human lives that have been lost. And while the conflict in the far west of the continent is getting worse by the day, exacerbated by the reality of climate change. So I appreciate and commend the government of Germany for bringing this important discussion on climate and security to the African continent. And we will all have also seen that the situation is getting worse. Only this week we have been warned by the World Meteorological Organization that the temperature levels has hit the highest ever, I think the highest recorded temperature, average temperature during these times of 17 degrees was recorded on Monday this week. You will also have seen that the WMO has told us that the 1.5 degrees centigrade that we have given ourselves in the Paris Agreement as our threshold beyond which if we go beyond, we will not be able to take residual action, will probably reach there quicker than we thought in the next 5 or so years. So this is a reality of the climate change. We are all, as a global community, living the new normal of climate situation. And that calls for action, of course, from all of us. And that is what of course, at the global level, the various meetings, including this one and the one that we will be going to in Dubai on COP28, going to discuss how we'll push forward the collective actions that is required for humanity to pull back from the brink of climate challenges. And that is also the message and the actions that we are going to bring at the first ever Climate Action Summit that is going to be held here in Nairobi from 4th to 6th September. Now coming back to your question specifically, the issue of climate conflict and fragility and security, of course, has its basis on the development and the livelihood issues of the people. The Prime Cabinet Secretary mentioned what happened in 1997 here in Kenya and the region when we had El Nino. And of course, we've just been warned by WMO and the weather agencies that there will be another El Nino this year. There's massive destructions that does happen, whether it is because of excess water or less water, and that requires investment and development. So it is about development and how development can create the resilience that we'll all desire to overcome the challenges of climate change. And that is the commitments that we have given ourselves at the global level being implemented. So in the conferences that we'll be hosting, both here in Nairobi and in Dubai, the issue will be making sure that the commitments that the world has given itself on taking action on climate change are met. In 15 or so years ago in Copenhagen, as we all know, we gave ourselves a target of $100 billion per year. I'm very happy to hear from Jennifer Morgan this morning that that target will be achieved this year. I think it is a great signal that at least that is coming to fruition. Last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, we had the loss and damage facility that was agreed for the first time in many years. Of course, that needs to be operationalized and capitalized. And again, we also heard from Jennifer Morgan representing, hopefully, the developed world, that is going to happen in Dubai. So the commitments that we have undertaken as global community needs to be fulfilled. And that is the push that we'll be doing. However, for us in Africa, the narrative change that we are putting forward at the summit that we are going to hold here in Nairobi is, yes, we contribute the least, less than 3 or 4%, depending on what statistics you look at, to the global greenhouse accumulation. And we are the most impacted. But we will be able now, and this is what the President of Kenya, who is also the chairman of the Committee of Heads of State and Government on Climate Change at the Africa Union level, is pushing, is we will be putting on the table what we are able to do as a continent to put our resources forward to see how we can contribute to the global goal of decarbonization. We are far ahead of achieving all the 3 goals that we gave ourselves in Paris, whether it is the finance goal, the mitigation goal, the adaptation goal. However, Africa wants to put its leg forward and say, we have resources, we have capabilities, and we will be putting those on the table and asking for partnership from the rest of the world, particularly from the developed world, genuine, honest partnership for us to address an existential threat that is affecting all of us. And that is the messaging that we're putting forward.
Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. And this move from being passive recipients of adaptation financing to really being proactive agents of change. This is really great to hear. But in neither the UNFCCC's mandate nor, as I understand so far, the agenda for the Africa Climate Summit, is there an explicit reference to peace and security? Yet we've heard from our panel that this is core. Yes, we really do want to see this kind of Kenyan or African leadership in the green transition. But as we heard from Alice, this is going to create new winners and losers. It's going to create new power dynamics. It can create conflict if we don't manage this carefully. We heard from Khalud how these frustrations and these psychological impacts can potentially have negative implications if they're not managed carefully. So do you see spaces, and do you see anything within your role as the climate envoy to insert measures that can address some of these human security measures within the agenda of the Africa Climate Summit? And whilst it's never going to be part of the negotiations of the COP, something that can be part of the way we understand the commitments made at COP28?
Well, thank you very much. That's a good question. One of the things that, one of the agenda items that we're putting forward at the summit in Nairobi is the whole issue of climate, migration, and security. And working with a number of actors, including the UN agencies, IMO, and others, presenting that. As we all know, the impact of insecurity and fragility arising from climate affects us, as I said, most. Many of our compatriots are every other day dying, migrating between here and the global north. And so it is a real security. Different countries of Africa, including our own here, host large numbers of displaced persons and refugees also. And so the issue of migration arising from conflicts, from climate impacts, is a particular concern of the continent of Africa. And therefore, we will be having a discussion in Nairobi, supported by several entities, intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, as well as our own governments. And we hope to take forward the outcome from the Nairobi summit to the COP28 and to the UN General Assembly that comes soon after the Nairobi summit. So we're very grateful, really, that the German government did take this to the UN Security Council several years, and now it has become a constant agenda in the Security Council. And so it is important that this now finds its space in the UNFCCC discussions as well, and Kenya will be taking that forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ali Mohammed, and to our speakers for this very quick fire stock take. I wish we could have had more time, but I'm glad we could at least set the scene with these perspectives. It's so important to hear these insights to ensure that whatever conclusions are taken from this meeting are really grounded in the lived experiences of those who are most affected. It's about, as we know, about connecting bottom up and top down and vice versa. And so I think it's really important that we start with this perspective. But with this view of connecting the bottom up with the top down, let's move straight on to our next session. Before that, I would love us to just thank our excellent panel.